Okay, good morning, everybody. We start this morning with a public hearing. I'll start with the public hearing's address. I'm Mark Pendergraft, and I'll be chairing today's public hearing. This is a public hearing for proposed Regional District of Okanagan's Milk-Mean Bylaw number 2800-29-2023. The proposed bylaw and related information, including written comments received to date, is available for review at the head table. At this public hearing, all persons wishing to speak will be given an opportunity to do so and are asked to commence their remarks by stating their name and address. Written comments may be submitted to the head table before the closure of this hearing. Anyone wishing to speak at this public hearing is asked to do one of the following. If you are participating by a computer, please click the raise hand button, which can be found in the participants panel on the bottom right-hand side of your computer screen. This will indicate that you wish to speak. If you are participating by a phone, please press *3 on your phone's keypad. This will also indicate that you wish to speak. Having indicated that you wish to speak, you will then be placed in a queue until you are invited to speak. All speakers will be restricted to a time limit of 5 minutes until everyone who wishes to speak has had an opportunity to do so. Anyone wishing to speak a second time may do so by following the same protocol of selecting the raise hand button on your computer or by pressing *3 on your phone's keypad. And of course, if you're in the room here with us, you can just raise your hand and that will also get you in the queue. To submit written comments, please email them to planning@rdos.bc.ca prior to the close of this public hearing. I will now ask planning staff to outline the specifics of the proposed bylaws. Go ahead, please.
Okay. This is a public hearing for Strategic Project X 2023.007-zone, which is a proposed amendment to the Okanagan Valley zoning bylaw and applies to electoral areas A, C, D, E, F, and I. The proposed amendment is regarding the minimum parcel area requirements for an accessory dwelling use to be in the form of a mobile home. Under the zoning bylaw, mobile home use is defined as a manufactured home, which is certified as being constructed to Canadian Standards Association Z240 series standard. Currently, the zoning regulation requires that a mobile home use can be implemented as an accessory dwelling on parcels greater than 4 hectares in area. This project originated from a set of options that were presented at the RDOS Planning and Development Committee meeting in order to provide additional housing options. This was presented on March 2nd, 2023. You can see that the current item is number 7 on that list there. At its following meeting on June 15th, the current project to review parcel area requirements for mobile homes was initiated. The proposed zoning amendment, number 2800.29, is proposing to replace subsection 7.2.7 under the accessory dwellings specific use regulations in the Okanagan Valley zoning bylaw. And the purpose of this amendment is to allow an accessory dwelling use to be in the form of a mobile home on parcels that are greater than 1 hectare in area, where an accessory dwelling use is otherwise permitted by the zoning bylaw. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I will now declare the public hearing open and ask if there is anyone who wishes to speak to the proposed bylaws. I see a hand in the audience here, so please step forward. And it would be best if you use the mic. That allows folks that are listening online to hear what's being discussed.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. It's good to see so many familiar, friendly faces around the table. Yeah, I'm happy to see this proposal come forward, and I'll speak specifically to our property. You know, we are 1.2 hectares, And I don't know if it looks like it, but my advanced age makes it more difficult to manage the whole property. But with the possibility that our kids could sell their home and free up their place for the market, because housing is needed everywhere, and put a mobile home on our property. We have a good spot for it. And then the idea is that my wife and I could move into the mobile home and the kids could have the big house. And then I would have more help on the farm. So that's it in a nutshell.
Okay, if we could get your name and address, we need that for the records too, please.
Okay. Terry Schaefer,
Thank you.
7101 Highland Way Road.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you for the comments. They definitely will
yeah.
be taken into consideration.
Well, thank you very much.
I'll ask for a second time. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak to the proposed bylaws? I'm not seeing any hands online or in the room. Am I missing anybody, Adam? Okay. I'll ask for a third and final time. Is there anybody wishing to speak to the proposed bylaws? Seeing none, I will hereby declare this public hearing closed at 9:06 a.m. And thank you, everybody. We can start straight into the regular committee meetings, and our first one of this morning is Protective Services. So I will go to Director Roberts to chair that one. Director
Good morning.
Roberts, please go ahead.
Good morning. Calling the meeting of Protective Services Committee open at 9:07. Can I have a motion to accept the agenda? I see that. And seconder? Thank you. All in favor? Thank you. I don't know. I'll just turn this over to the CAO because I see that we have a delegation.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yes, and I'm going to introduce Maury Kapistanek from Planet Works. Just for reference, we have a number of issues coming forward on telecommunications. We don't often talk about the infrastructure part of it. It's usually more about the communications side, so the answering points on our either primary ops center, which is ECOM down in Vancouver, or our secondary ops center, which is for fire only out of Kelowna. And to support all of that, to support all of the towers and radios and cell phones and now looking at satellites and next-gen communication from the answering points, we need a really robust, redundant telecommunication infrastructure. We did a study back in 2011, which was Planet Works, and we had a series of recommendations from that, and we've been implementing them over the course of the last decade or so. But it was time, with the changes that have been happening in the telecommunications industry, it was time for us to do that again. We went out for proposal, we awarded the contract to Planet Works, and now Mr. Kapistanek is ready to present on his report. We didn't send a recommendation along with this. We'll bring that in at a future meeting. This one is simply for information on the report and for you to ask questions on a very complex industry in order to get a better understanding prior to making any decisions. And you will get an idea of the cost of some of the recommendations from the report as well. So with that, Mr. Chair, we should turn this over to the Planet Works senior consultant, Mr. Kapistanek.
Great. Good morning. Can you hear me all right?
Sounds good. We can hear you. Great. Thank you.
Okay, great. Let me share my slide deck here. How's that?
Good.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Newell and the board for the opportunity to provide this presentation. This presentation is essentially a summary of the final report that I provided about a week ago. This study was started early in the year, and it took a lot of work interfacing with the various fire departments to determine how the system that was upgraded throughout 2012 to 2017 was doing, and to see where improvements are required and if there's any technology changes that we would recommend. Just as a quick summary, this is essentially a high-level view of what this radio system does. To the left, you'll see a person making a 911 call. It goes to ECOM, which takes the 911 call and decides if it's police, fire, or ambulance. If it's fire, they switch the call to Kelowna Fire Dispatch. And then, as you can see in this dotted line box, is the radio system for the regional district. The Kelowna Fire Dispatch ties into a point in Penticton, in Penticton, and then from there goes out into the different areas of the regional district. And just a little bit more detail here. You look at this from a map perspective, and you'll see that this radio system goes throughout the whole regional district. The red dots represent repeaters that provide radio coverage for each of the different fire department areas. The lines represent how those repeaters eventually tie back to that interface point in Penticton, and you can see it says the school district tower in Penticton here. And in this system, there's 12 links and 15 radio repeaters, and you can see pictures of generally what these sites look like if you're to get up to those high points. So we rely on connecting all of these systems together, these repeater systems together, via connections at high levels between mountaintops. And as the CEO mentioned, we worked on this original study back in 2011, giving our report in 2012, spending about $1.6 million to change the system to meet many standards that we try to achieve. Generally, in working on the second review, the response that I've been getting from the fire departments is that the changes were effective, and that the radio system essentially works very well. So we were happy to hear that, and then what we did is carried on with our second review. When we do this review, we look at 5 different areas. We look at radio coverage, we look at the capacity, so how well can the departments talk back and forth with dispatch and amongst themselves in their area. We look at reliability, whether or not this system can withstand a problem if something occurs with the technology, or there's something that some other factor that affects the system. We look at how well the system provides functionality for the radio users, so the fire department members and dispatch. And then we look at, how well can we maintain the system? So how is the RDOS have the internal resources to keep the system going, and who do they need externally to help the system continue to operate? It's a very radio is a very niche technology, and a very small domain for companies that can support and provide this type of technology. The standards that we try to adhere to, there's generally 4 sets of them. The first one is the NFPA 1221, which is a National Fire Prevention Association standard generated out of the United States, and we've adopted that standard in Canada as guidance, and it basically contains all the targets for how the system should operate, radio coverage goals, how it should be backed up, and so on. Then if there's structures involved like towers and antenna arrangements, there's a CSA standard S37 that we try to maintain. When it comes to the actual equipment that gets installed in the different sites, there's a Motorola R56 standard that we try to build to. And finally, of course, we want to work within the provincial national electrical codes to make sure it's safe and appropriate design for power use. What we did for this review is a big part of it was talking to the departments. We talked to all the key stakeholders, regional district, fire departments, contractors, and some manufacturers. We then put together a radio user survey and map product to all the fire departments so they can respond to a long list of questions about the system that covered those 5 points I mentioned earlier. And we also asked them to annotate on maps if they have any radio coverage area problems. We visited all the sites and we also visited the dispatch center in Kelowna and talked to the dispatch manager there. We did our own tabletop calculations on what coverage we should expect and compare it to what the fire departments were reporting. And those were generally consistent with each other. In one case, we did some actual on-site coverage measurements in Okanagan Falls because it was one of the more needed areas for improved coverage. And then, of course, we just reviewed the system architecture, how the system was built out after we did the original review. And that whole period was several months. As far as collaborating with the fire departments, again, the survey and the coverage issues, we went to every fire department and conducted on-site interviews, and we packaged this information into a baseline assessment document, which basically indicated the state of the system and also the comments of the fire departments. So that's a separate document to the final report. The fire chiefs, of course, had a chance to review it and provide additional feedback. Okay, the areas that, before I get into this, we did look at the technologies that the regional district uses right now, and they're for this type of terrain and for the usage by volunteer fire departments, the radio technology that you use today still is probably the best choice for your fire department communication systems. There are other technologies out there that are more digital radio types, but there doesn't appear to be any need for that type of technology in your system. That technology comes with a very big price tag as well. So that is something that we established right away. So from that, we looked at the various areas that needed attention for the system. So there's generally 4 different areas. So dealing with radio coverage issues, dealing with fire department responsibilities in their equipment, dealing with the infrastructure or the backhaul, those are those links from mountaintops to mountaintops, and then the management of the system. And what I'll do is go through each one of these and also talk about the estimate and cost to fix these issues. Okay, so when we talk about radio coverage, there are 2 different areas that each fire department tend to respond to. First, there's the fire response areas. And if you look on this map, you can see as an example, Penticton, there's a large blue area here. So this is the area that the fire departments are contracted to respond to for fire and medical calls. So if you look everywhere, you'll see 18 different fire protection areas, one for each fire department. As well, there is the road rescue areas. So you'll see these long yellow lines that define where fire departments can go to deal with a road rescue situation. And I wanted to point out, you'll see these blue triangles everywhere, those are cell towers, the known cell towers in the area. And you can see that generally, wherever there's cell towers, we generally have VHF repeater coverage for their fire protection areas. So in the road rescue areas, you can see that there's neither radio coverage or cell towers. So they're basically running in the dark when they're going to these different areas. And just to give you a more specific example, here's Karamias. You can see that Karamias, this is their fire response area in yellow. This is also a road rescue area, but you can see that they also go out to many different areas outside their region to respond to road rescue calls. So two different issues. In the review in 2012, we essentially concentrated on the fire protection and medical call areas. That was generally the mandate at that time. But with this study, we talked more about coverage beyond the fire protection areas, and most fire departments that have extended coverage areas have mentioned that they don't have any kind of communications coverage for road rescue. So in these recommendations I'm about to show you, I've classified them as short-term and long-term. Short-term are projects where if they're sufficiently budgeted and planned for, that they can have them done in 2024, and they will provide an impactful change to the system. The second type are long-term, which require planning usually, and maybe some piloting, some confirmation of performance before it's actually built. Those items tend to take between 18 and 36 months. The general state of the radio equipment commercial domain is a bit fluid right now post-COVID. So a lot of things are taking a lot longer, either through procurement or through co-location agreements. It's been really quite a change. And so it could be that these long-term items might even take longer. It's just the way it is right now. Okay, the first thing is the radio coverage for fire protection areas. So those on that map, I showed you the big colored areas. So that's the areas we're talking about for each region. So each region, there are some regions that felt that their radio coverage for fire response was fine. These ones are fire departments that have specified that there is that there are like a significant problem. So in the first list there, you'll see Anarchist through to Penticton. They have small areas that require some coverage. And the coverage is to get a portable radio user on the street talking back to dispatch. That's the target. So you'll see that in those 5 areas, we have an inexpensive approach. It's a radio product that's used in a vehicle of apparatus, and they have to be on site to use it. The cost of that device is between $8,000 and $12,000, and of course it can be implemented within a year. In Karamias, they have a more expensive problem to fix. It's generally their repeater locations up on Pincushion Mountain, and the antenna is just too low. And so there's a cost to move that antenna to an adjacent tower up high enough to clear the terrain and give them better coverage in the benchlands area in Coston. And also, as you go towards Headley, we have to actually put a completely new radio site there called a drop site to add coverage towards Headley. The total range in price is $134,000 to $171,000. You'll notice that there's quite a range in these prices that are estimates that I'm giving, and that's because the industry is just so fluid with cost that we can't pin it down to a really set number. So there is some range here. With Oliver, they have coverage issue areas along behind the mountain to the east, Nickabeck Road, I think it is. So that we would recommend putting in another drop, what we call a drop site. The cost to that is $53,000 to $70,000. With that implementation and all these changes to actual repeater sites or adding a site, we're recommending first to do a coverage test and analysis to make sure that it does meet the intended goals. And then that would be done in year 1, and then year 2 and on, you would implement it. With Tulameen, they have just an issue with their repeater site. It's up on Blakeburn Mountain. The shelter itself has been battered a bit by weather, and so they need to renovate the shelter. And they also don't have a tower up there, so they actually have antenna installed on the top of a tree. So that site never got fully developed, I don't think, in the earlier upgrade. And so that and dealing with some road access issues, it's a big cost, but to update that site, we feel between 176 and 360,000. That big range in price is basically the not understanding what it would take to do stuff up at that site due to logistics. It's a very difficult site to get to. Okay, we're still on fire response area coverage. For Okanagan Falls, the repeater is at the fire department right now, and we recommend to move that repeater up to Peachcliff Mountain at an existing Rogers Tower site. And so there's a cost of $200,000 to $250,000 to do that, and it would probably take about 2 years to do. I've already got pre-approval for co-location from Rogers, so we know that they will allow you up there. And that would provide coverage behind Peachcliff Mountain and towards Heritage Hills. And we would also use a site we already use in Culleton called Grey Ledge to also help with coverage. So that one's the most involved, and we've already done coverage tests, and it would do what we want it to do. For Soyuz, they have their repeater up on Anarchist Mountain at it's called Telesasquatch site. That location repeater, it doesn't work well for them down at the base of Anarchist Mountain and towards the cottages. So the recommendation is to move that repeater site down to an existing Rogers Tower site at the base of Anarchist Mountain. And the cost to do that is between $250,000 and $270,000. Now there are 3 areas that never did get repeater systems back in the first upgrade, and that was a decision that was made at the time by the regional district. Eastgate, Eris, and Hayes. I've been asked to cost out what it would take to put repeaters in those 3 areas. For Eastgate, that one is fairly straightforward, putting a repeater equipment and a few antenna improvements at the fire hall, and that price between $55,000 and $68,000. That can be done in a year. With Eris and Hayes, those 2 areas are extremely tricky from a radio perspective because of the terrain. What complicates this is that there are no existing cell towers or towers by other people there. So we basically have to build new sites. There's 2 approaches. The first approach down at the bottom here is where they would build a site that would be shared by Eris and Hayes. But before we do that, we have to prove out the concept with a coverage test. If that coverage test indicates that Eris and Hayes, they can address Eris and Hayes's coverage requirements, then the cost is somewhere between $300,000 and $500,000. Again, the big difference in cost is the preparation of an access road and studying the ground conditions. If that coverage testing shows that it's not what we need, then you'd be building 2 different sites, one at the fire hall in Eris to address the coverage for that fire department. It also requires some equipment down the highway, the Princeton Summerland Road, to connect it into the system. So we're looking between $465,000 and $520,000 to establish that. Hayes is an even trickier area to cover. So we would have to establish a site in Crown Land just northeast up the hill a bit from the fire hall. That one's between 412 and 617. And that would probably take 2 to 3 years to build. Okay, that's now we're moving on to the road rescue coverage areas. So those are those areas that were those yellow lines that went into locations where there's no cell coverage and no current radio repeater coverage. We looked at several different approaches, building your own big system, using another type of satellite service called Iridium, and also the Starlink mobility solution. So we're recommending the Starlink mobility platform for a few reasons. The biggest is the initial startup cost is quite low, and you can scale it as required. So basically, as you can see in this vehicle, you can see a panel up here, that's the antenna that points up to the sky and connects to the constellation of Starlink satellites. That provides essentially a localized Wi-Fi connection, and the users, the fire departments, would use their own personal devices or laptops to connect onto the internet, which would then connect to the EOC in Penticton and also to dispatch. And so basically you would use the applications you would normally use on the internet to converse and do video and so on. The implementation per vehicle is between $4,000 and $5,000 installed. The usage fee is $350 a month, and if you put one of these devices in all 18 fire departments, the first year cost would be about $130,000 to $140,000. That's the equipment and the monthly airtime charges. Over a 10-year period, you're looking, would add up to about $1 million worth of fees to use it. The other options that we showed, and that it's in the final report, where you build a system for the regional district and the regional district owns and operates, is slightly higher than $1 million over a 10-year period, but it requires you to build the whole system. You can't scale it. So this is what we're recommending right now. Okay, so we're done with the coverage enhancements. We're now moving to the fire department radios. The fire departments own and control and responsible for their radios. However, there is a certain feature that most of the radios have that give them an element of safety. On each radio, there's an emergency button, and that when it's pressed, it allows everyone that's on the channel to understand that someone's in trouble. That feature has not been enabled on the radios. It also provides an ID so that when someone's talking, everyone can see on the radio what number of radios talking. And that also gets all the way back to dispatch, so dispatch can see who's talking. If you remember those lines you saw on that big diagram, those links are shared by multiple departments. And when a department talks back to this dispatch, if they're not paying attention, they don't know who's calling. With the addition of this ID signal, when someone calls, they will see on their dispatch screen what radio it is and what department it is, and it will greatly help them do their job better. There's a cost to that. There's a cost to building the database for the fire halls that would also be used at the dispatch center. So each department would have to pay about $50 to $80 per radio to reprogram them, and the regional district would provide the database work, which is somewhere between $12,000 and $20,000. And that would be an improvement to the way the fire department radios operate. I also noticed going to different departments that the base stations owned and used by the fire departments are not fully installed properly. There's installation issues and some grounding issues that I don't think have ever been done. So I'm recommending that each fire department have their radio contractor come in and do those corrections to the installations, and it'll range between $1,000 to $3,000 per haul. So now we're on to the resiliency of the system. These links that were put in, these major links here in green, and then these red links here are what get connections from the repeaters all the way back to dispatch, essentially. These some of these sites are very hard to get to during the winter. So Mount Kobu, Sterling Creek, Beaconsfield Mountain, these all are sites that if the weather's bad or the contractor is not in town, it would take some time to get back going. If one of these links goes down, there is a backup means for dispatch to call by phone the departments and page them out. So they have that backup feature. But what we're proposing is to add some redundancy to these links, to these major links and these major radio sites, so that if there is a problem with the radios, that they have a means of dialing in through a cell data connection to switch over to a backup set of equipment. And that can be done within minutes. So that's what this section is all about. If this were done, then the system generally would meet the NFPA definition for a resilient system. So we're close, we just need to do this last step. The cost to do that, I'll just go back to this. These are the microwave sites here, or sorry, this is a microwave site, this is a microwave site, and the rest are radio links. So for the microwave links, you're looking between $60,000 and $80,000 to just add redundant radios for both microwave links. And then for the key radio sites, which is the school board office where the interface point is, Mount Kobu and Beaconsfield Mountain, these are the costs to add redundant radio equipment. And so the whole thing is somewhere between $235,000 and $290,000 to implement. It can be done fairly quickly because it's just procuring the radios and installing them and doing a bit of interface work at the site. So that can be done fairly quickly. The one thing that we don't have as well in the system, the link redundancy and this alarm monitoring and notification were recommended back in 2012, but I don't think they had the budget to complete it. So I'm re-recommending it now. With this feature, it basically monitors the status and health of the equipment at each of the remote sites. So today, if a site had an equipment problem, the only way you'd know is when they actually go to try and use it and it doesn't work. And they have protocols to deal with that, but it would add a delay to the response time. With this, you would be adding equipment at the site to monitor power conditions and the radio equipment status. And as soon as there's an issue, it would through the cell system, it would send emails to a list of people to let them know that there's a problem at the site. And hopefully you get that before they need to use that particular site for a call. If they get the email, then the protocol would be that the fire department would know they would have to operate in a backup mode, and dispatch would know they'd have to operate in a backup mode, and the regional district would know that they'd have to get their radio maintenance contractor to go out and deal with that problem. So that's what that is. It's somewhere between $35,000 and $50,000, and I believe most of this could be implemented by the IT department in the regional district. Because there's multiple sites, I suspect it will take up to 2 years to implement it throughout every site. And finally, we're looking at how to manage a system. So right now, the regional district has contracted an external radio contractor to manage the system. They're the ones that understand the system. They're the ones that can make changes to the system and maintain the system and deal with problems with the system. There's no real internal ability to do any of that, let alone manage the system, technically speaking. So what I'm recommending is that their RDOS moved into the direction of having their IS department start to manage the system, not to do anything technical with it, because that's very specialized, but to actually start managing the system. So that would take several steps. These are the big steps that I have recommended. The first would be to have the IS department trained on the radio system, a real detailed course on how the system's put together and things they should look out for and how to maintain the system. And then from that, they could effectively manage any external contractors that help with the radio system. They need to develop a better standard for maintenance. Right now, it is based on what the radio contractor has said they will do. But in looking at what they do, I think it should be more comprehensive. And so there should be a set written standard to cover what should be maintained and how. And the final part is the user radios that the fire departments buy right now generally is decided by the department and the radio reseller that they deal with, the radio contractor that the fire department deals with. And what they buy is all over the map throughout the district. Some of them are really good high-grade radios. Some of them are not. They're very inexpensive radios. And so the regional district should set a bar for the specifications for the radios and pagers that they buy, so that when the departments buy radios, they know that they're getting something with a minimum that meets a minimum standard. And right now that does not occur. So my suggestion is that they develop a radio specification that each department is to follow. They still go buy their radios and pagers, but at least they have some guidance on the tier of radio they should buy. So with this part, it's somewhere between $28,000 and $43,000 to set the IS department up to start onboarding the system to manage. And I think that is my quick summary on what we're recommending you address in the near term.
Thank you, Mr. Sorry if I don't pronounce it right. Kapstanik?
Capistanic.
Kapstanik. All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
I say thank you for your presentation, and I think some of us are all digesting the numbers as well. But is there any questions for Mr. Kapstanik? And if you could take down your presentation, then we can see whether or not people have questions for you.
Good.
Okay, I see Director Spencer Coyne.
Thank you. I have two questions. Your radio ID system that you're talking about, does that make it go to a digital radio system? And then the other one is the Starlink. Do we know if that will work in areas like Tulameen and that? Because we've had issues with satellite phones in those areas before. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. For the first question, these radios are analog radios, and when we looked at the technology you're using, staying analog is still the right thing to do. Within those analog radios, they do have a way to send short bursts of digital information, and so it doesn't make the radio a digital radio. It keeps it analog, but it just sends a short burst when they transmit, every time they transmit. With the question about Starlink, in the report, we recommend, we have a costing in there to do pilot with the Starlink technology. So the idea, I believe IS department is currently trialing Starlink for other purposes. So the recommendation is for the regional district to purchase a mobility version of that product and do their own internal coverage tests at the various areas to make sure they understand how well it works for them. And then if any areas that work well and they need that kind of road rescue coverage, then they would go ahead and purchase the Starlink unit.
All right, thank you very much. Any further questions? Just looking for a hand. I have a couple of questions if no one else does. Okay, so I'll get when again. So thank you again for such a comprehensive report and the material that's there. Now I have a couple of questions that's kind of based on like the past question from Director Coyne when you talk about Starlink, and when we look at the usage of satellite, a lot of our narrow valleys. And so my question is in regards to placement of drop radio sites and then having follow up that certain units that we have like a relay system, like having like you've got a repeater, a mobile repeater that's set up in regards to, let's say we've got a fire truck that's right up the Ashenola Valley. You're not getting satellite up there unless it's just right above you for a few moments. And we've got cell at the base of it, but a lot of times we've in the past had to set up relays. Is that technology? Is there a technology in regards to you've got your drop sites that work in regards to some problem areas, and then you have whether or not it's all your units or a specific unit that is a mobile repeater to be able to relay to units. Is that something that exists?
Well, first of all, there are a lot of satellite services available. So Starlink isn't the only one. The appealing thing about Starlink is just the sheer number of satellites that they are launching. And so over time, it's our belief that there will be enough satellites up there that will cover most parts of the RDOS, even a narrow valley like Ashenola. And again, trialing it to make sure that today it would work for them. Now, as far as other satellite technologies, some of them are single satellites. So where you are in relation to that satellite really matters. So when it comes to drop sites, now a drop site is something where it's usually it's installed on a pole and it's always there. It's like a mobile repeater but fixed. It's always there. So it's convenient for the department, and also you're not using up an apparatus and people to create a relay. It is possible to create one or several hops for a drop, but it starts to get quite expensive, and also you have to be concerned with how do you power it. So if you're in a narrow valley, you're not going to get much sun, so solar might not be the greatest choice. Yeah, so does that answer your question? Is there?
Thank you. It does to some degree. The next thing would be a process, which we would talk probably within the regional district. But for instance, my background in running facilities up and down the Similkameen Valley, we had a repeater system. We had VHF, sorry, and above Headley, off a nickel plate, there's a power place that we've got connected on a lease of government land, and that power still exists. And it gave us coverage with a ricochet off Otter Lake right up to Tulameen, which that wasn't great. But I mean, going up towards Princeton to Wolf Creek, all the way up to the Ashenola. So there's these specific places, and then there's some dead spots. And so we used to use, old school analog repeater. Our cars all had mobile radio systems mounted as well, and then we would ricochet up and do remote relaying. So my question was based on, you got the satellite, we go from there, then you go to the analog, in regards to moving things. Like for instance, if we're going to put a lot of money and move to a 30-meter tower, because we're talking pin cushions and meeting it, can you extend the range of that 30-meter by throwing another drop site somewhere and just extending it, or is it necessary to remove that as the base antenna?
Well, let's see if I understand you right. So in the area of Karamias, Pincushion is probably one of the best located sites for repeater that hits a good part of the populated areas, so the areas that have dwellings. It doesn't help as you go towards Headley because there's a mountain in the way. And so that's where we recommend putting a drop site. Just, I don't know if you know where that red bridge is. Yeah, so that general area. So that site would see Pincushion, but it would also see the highway towards Headley. So that's why that's the good strategic location. So you can use that strategy in other areas as long as the drop site that you pick can see the main repeater site. It's really this area, southern BC, is a really tricky area for radio, as you know, you've experienced it. And trying to get adequate coverage in less populated areas, especially road rescue, is always tricky because you're always balancing cost versus how often do you use it. And so that is something that's always on our mind. Now, if you read the final report and you looked at the area that talked about road rescue coverage, we had looked at a really old school way of doing it, and that's called low band radio. And it's a technology that uses frequencies that are quite a bit less than VHF. And search and rescue departments, the military, and many big police departments in the US still use it because the coverage is amazing. And I had proposed as an option to establish 3 low band repeater sites, as one at Mount Kobu, one at Holmes Mountain in Princeton, and one at Naquala Mountain in Penticton. And by putting these 3 repeaters out there, you would probably augment quite well the VHF coverage without using satellites. So that's in there as an option. I would definitely want to do coverage tests to prove it out, but I think it would be great. The downside is that you have to build it out. You can't just do part of it. You have to do pretty much all of it. And with that is a huge price tag. So it's north of $1 million over 10 years, but you own it and you control it, and you're not relying on other service providers like a satellite company or something like that. So that is another way we could do it.
Okay, perfect. I see Director Spencer Coyne has a question.
Yeah, just a quick one. When you guys were looking at a repeater for Eris and Hayes Creek, did you guys look at using the China Creek sites as a repeater location, since those guys up there already have access? Well, they have internet through them, so there'd probably be a road and access to those spots.
Yeah, we did. I've talked to Brian about their sites and Mr. Miller, and yeah, we picked sites that would work. They have some internet sites in the Hayes Creek area and the Eris area, but they weren't going to really provide the coverage that we would want. So yes, we did.
Any follow-up question there? Oh, okay. Any other questions? As I'm looking for, and so that no one else is saving for me sucking all the oxygen out of the room. My last statement would be more of a statement. Is the alarm, when you talked about the monitoring and alarm system, and again, I know you wouldn't be able to answer this specifically in regards to the issue, but in regards to the news of the day, the issue that happened in Maui with a cutoff of power and all that, not that we could state for sure what that would have done to have a monitoring system there, but is that similar? Is that the desired effect, is to be able to have a knowledge that you've lost the ability from your repeater systems or your alarms by an alarm system? Yes, that's a big part of it. Like I mentioned in my description of that recommendation, that today, if let's pick Mount Kobu as an example, if Mount Kobu went down for any reason, the only way
you would know it is when dispatch tries to do a call out that requires Mount Kobu. So let's say they want to dispatch Oliver and there's no response and Oliver doesn't get paged out and that's it. And another equally bad example or good example of a bad scenario is if they're in the middle of a conversation and they're trying to do what they're doing and all of a sudden communication stops. So that's the way it would work today. Now, if you have an alarm system, it's really being proactive. It's knowing right away you've got an issue and that you do have an issue. So as an example with say the two examples I gave, sometimes miscommunication occurs because there's a finger problem, like someone on either end isn't operating the equipment properly. So the dispatcher doesn't do something right, or the radio user doesn't use something right. So they assume that there's a system problem when really it's just a human error issue. So this alarming would also deal with that so that it would tell you definitively that you've got an issue at the site. It wouldn't trap all the issues at the site, but it would basically say, hey, you're out of power, or the batteries are low, or the radio equipment's telling us we've got a problem. And as soon as everyone knows that, they can pivot to their backup plan and carry on.
Well, thank you. Very well spoken. Last chance for any questions? All right, not seeing any questions or any hands. Thank you, sir. It was a very well stated report. Really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. You're welcome.
I'll now pass this back to the CAO in case we have anything else.
No, nothing else for me, Mr. Chair. I already stated that we would be bringing in a follow-up report with an implementation perspective to it as far as options the board may have with regards to undertaking some of the recommendations.
Thank you, CAO. Okay, so now can I have a motion to adjourn since we have no more on the agenda? I take that hand and second. Yep. Everybody in favor? All right. Thank you. And I'll pass this back to Chair.
Okay, thank you, Director Roberts. That moves us into Corporate Services Committee, and we do have a proposed agenda there. We do have to add, though, one item to it, which is the UBCM meetings. So that will be under, or just after item C. We'll put that discussion there. So looking for a motion to approve the agenda as amended. Moved, seconded, thank you. All those in favor? Great, any opposed? Motion carries. First item up is board policy review. CAO.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So occasionally we bring in policies that the board has either adopted before and we believe could benefit from a review or a change. And then we also, from time to time, bring in new policies for board discussion. So I'm going to turn this over to Ms. Malden. She's going to introduce these. When we get to the voyant alert section of the last policy, this is where we talk about alerts and notifications. And this is where previously you had indicated that you'd like to have a discussion about what should be included within the alerts and notifications. So that will be an important part of that discussion. Otherwise, sort of housekeeping, but that last policy is where you'll want to focus your attention. So we'll turn this over to Ms. Malden, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Ms. Malden.
Thanks very much. So I should note the Regional District of Okanagan-Similkameen has approximately 85 policies at this point. That is board policy. We have probably the same number of administrative or corporate directives, which the board doesn't often see. Those are more administrative. But with regard to our policies that we have put that on a 5-year rotating cycle. And so you will see them fairly regularly coming up for discussion and input on just a check-in, basically, to make sure that those policies are still what we want them to be. So I think we were hoping to spend a little bit of time too at the legislative workshop on overall policy structure and highlight some of those ones that the board may not often see. But for today, we're focused on the communication policy and a minor amendment to that, which puts an onus on the fire departments, and we've worked with them on this to ensure that they're comfortable with their own social media and provide guidelines for them and everything. And our communication section works closely with them. That relationship is strengthening all the time. They're relying on us for some guidance, and that which is super positive. That we haven't enjoyed that quite so much before, but with these policies, we're seeing an improvement in those communications and had a lot of feedback from the fire department. So the goal of that one is simply to put the onus on those fire departments to manage their own social media accounts in accordance with regional district standards. The information system use and social media policy has been a bear for some years now. It was put together when we had no communications. Social media was in its infancy, and we just sort of lumped it all together because at that point, I think IT sort of looked after that kind of stuff off the edge of their desk. So we've taken it apart, in essence. We've put social media policy separated from the information systems. They don't seem to fit anymore as they have evolved. So what you have is the draft one from some time ago, and then you have the two new ones in front of you as well. Basically, it is a splitting and updating of the existing material that was in there. But that may prompt some conversation and questions. If there's any questions on the technical aspect of the information systems use policy, the new one, I may not be able to answer those. I may throw Adam on the spot, or it might be a question that we have to refer back to Danny and come back with later on. And then, yes, as the CAO said, the Voyant Alert policy is probably where we want to spend a little bit of time making sure that we understand what the board is after with that system. It's a significant system. It is a system that is implemented through much of the province, and every local government that's implementing it, of course, experiences a few bumps as we onboard, but we are actually working with a fair number of other local governments to make sure that any glitches that one encounters, others can look out for, that sort of thing. So it wouldn't hurt to spend a little bit of time getting some feedback on the board on that one.
Okay. So any questions on the policies that we're looking at? Director Gettins, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for putting these policies together. I'm quite glad that they're separated out and we've got a Voyant Alert policy right now, because I've always struggled with the consistency of how that's used and when it's used, so we can keep building up citizen trust and how we're going to communicate with them. So I did want to talk a little bit about that as well. But when I go through the policies, excuse me, and it's like the social media policy, there's more work involved with the policy. For one, I mean, like there's more responsibility being put on staff. So I'm curious to hear from, I guess, Ms. Malden, how are we going to support the policy? So when we have, two-way communication and dialogue between the social media sites, and how do we manage this? Because I think where I've always struggled is that the ideas are here, but things are not being executed the way that necessarily we think they will be. So what's needed in-house? Like what support is needed so these policies can actually be managed? Because I think there's actually a lot more work in these policies than you might realize if you don't do a lot of communications as a professional.
Ms. Malden?
So I guess to that I would say, number one, we have to get that policy to where we're all happy with it. Defining the roles, responsibilities is a big part of that. And then the second part also would be to embed direction in our corporate directive. So that would be a consistent corporate direction across the entire local government. So I also will say too that at budget time, there will be discussions about the current positions that are in communications and where they sit and where, I'll have a proposal for where they could sit. But ultimately, it's kind of an approach that the board has to support, and then we have to corporately implement it in a consistent way through our corporate directive.
So,
Follow-up?
yeah, thanks. As a follow-up to that, because prior from the last term and just this recent term, it seemed to be department-led to when departments can participate with Voyant Alert. And for me, that was hard to keep track of when Voyant Alert would be used and when it wouldn't be used. And it was inconsistent for me. So if we get this policy done as a corporate directive, then what we see in Voyant Alert for the notifications, that's everybody. Like everybody's going to have to do that with all the departments are going to be doing their communications the same. So when there's an information release sent out, there's also going to be these other 3 steps. And maybe it's a Voyant Alert and then it'll go on this media and this media. And we as directors will know how that information is getting to our citizens, whether it's a water use issue or it's a community event or it's an emergency.
Go ahead, Ms. Moulton.
Right, so that is the goal of the policy, is to set that clear direction from the board as to what is expected. And in speaking about Voyant specifically, in the policy, there's the 2 different sections. There's the emergency alert, and then there's the general notification. So what we're focused on there with bringing that consistency as to what material goes out, obviously the emergency alert part of it is a given. We haven't seen where there's been any real lack of communication there. Anybody who's signed up will get these notifications. It's the general one that's more of a, has been open to interpretation, and that's why a policy is here now with the board, is to really solidify what is expected. And then once that happens and the policy is adopted, then that would be consistently implemented across the organization as policy is. So we kept those categories fairly broad, but we were specific with certain things like any kind of surveys, any kind of general notifications about programs, that sort of thing, and spelled it out, water notices, sewer notices, so that we had a good understanding as to whether that is what the board wants. Now, again, today is an opportunity to provide some feedback into that so we could adjust accordingly, but we were pretty specific in the actual things that would occur if the policy is adopted in the way that it's reading today. So that is done a lot through Department of Education. Certainly the management team would take that back to their departments and say, you know, here's how we're going to make sure that we're communicating using Voyant Alert for general notifications. It also comes through info releases. We put out a ton of info releases, and those all do come through communications. And at that point, that's an opportunity for us to say, should we be using Voyant Alert for this? Does that apply to the policy? So that's where we expected an adjustment.
Yeah, and I'll just make one final comment. It's just a comment. I'm really glad to see this. I know it's a lot of work, and this kind of change is a ton of work internally. But you know, I had a Parks Commission meeting a week or so ago, and there was a community event that none of the park commissioners knew about. One commission person showed up to the community event with their 2 kids, and that was the only people that came to a community event. So I think this is a big step forward. In the other hand of it, when we got the Voyant Alert about the 1 hectare policy and the mobile homes, and that went to all of Area F, my phone went crazy because we can't have accessory dwellings for everybody. So it works. Like I would rather have way more people call me and ask questions than not show up to do something that they're paying for. So I appreciate this, and I think it's a great first step.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Director Federico.
Thank you, through the chair. Under non-permitted uses, it indicates paid program registration. So just wondering then if that would limit our recreation programs and whether we would be using this system to alert that we have a new registered program in our area.
So we would not be notifying if it's anything to do with promoting a service where there's a fee attached, a cost attached. Canadian anti-spam legislation is very rigid and has imposed significant fines up to $100,000 to local governments when they're seen to be promoting products through ways where people have not expressly consented to receiving these notifications. So as far as we would go with recreation programs is we may send out a notification saying the new rec guide is out, please click here, or go to our website to have a look at that, see if there's any programs that you're interested in. Other than that, that's as far as we would go with any kind of promotional type service.
Any follow-up?
Not follow up to that, but just one more item.
Go ahead.
Just kind of reading through all the items that we would be sending out, which is wonderful because it would be getting information out to our residents. Will our residents start to feel sort of message fatigue or overload if we're sending out everything? So I guess just conversation around how much and what do we want to be sending out so that way we're not constantly bombarding them and then eventually those alerts and those important messages are being missed because we've just bombarded them with too much.
That can be a concern. Ms. Malden, thoughts?
Yeah, so on that, the important thing to communicate out to the citizens is that when they sign up for Voice Alert, they immediately, and this is something we're working on, they immediately get all notifications. So they have to go in and they have to remove the ones they don't want. Some people want all of them and they want 15 of them a day. Other people want very selective ones, and that's why we've created those categories to hopefully narrow it down for them. As for fatigue, the goal is to ensure that we know what departments are sending out on any given day for voyant messaging. That is something that Eric and the crew work on, ensuring that there's not 20 of them going out per day. You know, there's a balance, and sometimes a more significant notification will outweigh a lesser one, and that will be scheduled for the next day. So it's a matter of working together to make sure that nobody is getting absolutely bombarded, but everybody is getting exactly what messages they want. So.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions? Go ahead, Director Monteith.
Thank you, through the chair. So I do want to mention that last summer, when the Caramase Creek fire was going on, part of my residents were evacuated, but yet they were getting a notification for a public meeting. So it was a bit of a mixed message. So I guess that's just basically what you said, watching that sensitivity of I guess the notifications, right? So we're watching that just because that was sort of a bit of a confusion, and some try to go back home to go to the meeting. So anyways, thanks.
You have a comment from the Director Knodel. I see a hand from you. Go ahead.
Thank you. And through the chair, I'm just wondering whether we shouldn't be separating either our tones or our system for a difference between notification and emergency alert. Even people who have asked for all the notifications can get jaded to the fact that they're coming in, and then we end up with a serious issue, and we're definitely in a time of serious issues, and people postpone taking a good look at their notifications until they're in trouble. Perhaps we need a separate system for emergency alerts. Thank you.
Ms. Malden?
That's actually a great point. And that's something we'll take back to Voyant Alert and see if we can do that and reach out to a couple other local governments as well. I don't think that that's anything we've considered to this point. Eric could correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah, that's something to look into.
I see Eric moving up to the front. You have something to add?
To the chair? No, you're not wrong at all. The system itself, though, Voyant Alert has critical, which is an emergency notification, and informational. And the problem is, I think, when people receive a message from Voyant Alert, there's no differentiating between the two. And the challenge is that there are still many people, and always will be people, who feel that an alert system is only for emergencies, and some people feel it should only be for emergencies. But on the other side, if we want to proactively contact residents about public meetings and events, that's one of the best ways to do it. So really, I think the question is, how are we using Voyant Alert? It's in a system that is really useful, will always confuse people because technology confuses people at many different steps. But I don't think it's the kind of system you pay for, because it's a lot of money, to only use for emergencies. I think that would be a misuse of it, but there are some local governments who've decided to do that. They just want to use it for only emergencies, and that's it. That would put the onus on the public to go and find all those other pieces of information that they need when there are events happening.
Okay, Ms. Mullen, you have something to add?
I think Director Canodal, you were referring to different tones or different notification sounds for that. And that's where, again, I would like to look into that with Voyant Alert, because we know that the provincial and federal ones have very different tones than any other notification that comes into our phones. So it's certainly worth looking into, and we'll advise the board what we find out on that.
Okay.
And to the chair, my colleague Sarah just sent me a text to mention there is a klaxon or an alert sound. So for something that is an emergency or critical notification, you'll get an audible sound, which differentiates it from a public meeting.
Okay. If it could be more distinctive, I think is what we're looking for, but good thought. Director Taylor.
Yeah, I'd like to follow on Director Canodal's comments. I'd like to see some kind of distinction between the system that's used for emergencies, which sort of uses order, alert, notification, I think. And then there's other stuff, information release. And I see them as two separate things. A public meeting, that's an information release, no matter how you slice it.
Okay. Any other? Director Gattins.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, I know I've spoken a lot on this, but there is also, I know that, there are people that are fatigued and people not getting enough information, but there is some onus as well as citizens that if your local government is sending you a message, and if you want the information, you signed up for it, take a second and take a look at the first few lines. I think they're pretty clearly written out, to be honest. And I think oversharing information, I've never had that complaint. I've never had any citizen say, God, you are telling me too much. I know too much what's going on. I'm perfectly aware of what's happening next week. I've never had that. There are a few people that we're always not going to please, but I don't know how local governments do this. It's like we can't tell people to go to Facebook and rely on Instagram. That's not right. We can't tell them to read the newspaper like we all used to do in the olden days where we all got the same information at the same time and came back and reread it that afternoon. I don't know how else we do it, but there's a shared responsibility here and the citizens have a role to read it and make a decision, make sure they're just signed up for what they want to sign up for. But if we've got staff that are willing to share the information so people are engaged with us, I think that's what we need to support. So I'll move, if this is required a motion, I'll move the administrative recommendation. I think this is a good first step.
Okay, we've got the three parts of that, so you're moving all three. And it's seconded, so it's on the floor. Discussion, go ahead, Director Federico.
Another quick question about the information systems policy. Well, kind of two questions. One, has the insurance company seen this one? Because I'm guessing that this would then impact what happened a couple of years ago. So just making sure that insurance is comfortable with how that policy looks. And then if that's an appropriate policy to put something about staff who have left the organization and access to information, because I didn't see anything mentioned in there about that.
I see Ms. Mullen writing that one down.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how much Danny has communicated with our insurance company on this. I know he's been working with them quite significantly on a fair number of things. I would have to check with him on that. And as for the process for handling departing staff, again, we'll get confirmation from Danny. I know that there is a protocol and I know that, everybody's required to hand things in. But as for the time that they're here, I couldn't speak to that and I wouldn't want to put Adam on that. Yeah, so we'll leave that for Danny and I will definitely get back to those.
Okay. And the incident a couple of years ago, I'm thinking is the hack. Yeah. Okay, just so everybody's clear that we experienced. Director Roberts.
Yeah, thank you. And I have been in discussion with Mr. Thomas around the Voyant. When the Voyant alert comes out, I find sometimes the struggle. And again, I know this is all part of this process. It's something that's going to be going on. The route that you go from the alert itself to getting the specific information, because we've got different websites. And I did remember from the last presentation that was made from communication that they're looking at, having that housed into a one singular area when they were talking about the website. So I'm excited about that because which I did send Eric today. I sent the thing out that kind of, this is the path you go to get this information for your address. Because I've been getting phones left, right, and center, am I on alert or am I on order? Do I need to leave? It's just kind of like, no, you're in a valley away. But Appreciate all the hard work that's going into this, and I'm really excited about us moving in this direction. Thank you.
Okay. Not seeing any other hands. Last chance to discuss it. We do have the motion on the floor, and it is a group vote, so all those in favor. Thank you. Any opposed? Motion carries. Brings us down to the next item, which is the elected officials code of conduct, CAO.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So each local government is now obligated to at least discuss code of conduct. And we've had an ongoing review of a regional code of conduct over the last 6 months. So we had that workshop back in January with Young Anderson, and we took feedback from the board on how they wanted to proceed on that. And we've had now a draft policy review. We've had it through the CAO group. We've had it back through legal review. And we have a proposal. Now, within this, when we're talking about a regional program, the regional district cannot commit another local government. We can't commit one of our member municipalities as to what they're going to do with the code of conduct. We think there's a benefit to at least considering consistency in partnerships in this, but we also know that some of our municipalities have already adopted a code of conduct, and they may not want to revoke those and sign on to the regional district one. But there are some concepts within this draft policy that the committee will want to discuss, and then by all means, we'd be prepared to go back out to the municipalities and talk about the benefit of regionalization on this. So I'm going to turn this over to Ms. Malden, and she can take you through the process.
Okay, Ms. Malden.
Thanks very much, Chair. So the CAO did a lot of my intro, so stole my thunder. So we'll just probably move more towards focusing on the policy itself. It is significant. We started off with 20 pages, and I think we're down to 9. And this was a lot of work put in by all the corporate officers of the member municipalities and the regional district. And Mark O'Coin was the one who did the majority of the heavy lifting there, and then working with the lawyer on hashing it all out. So quite a significant process. It went through the CAA group twice and received some good feedback from them. So I think at this point, I'll turn it over to Mark O'Coin, and he can sort of walk through the elements of this. And going back to those 6 questions that we had focused on at the workshop, which initially informed this process. So.
Okay, thank you. Mark, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm just going to get Adam to bring up the presentation for us. Thank you. Yep. Okay, so just thought I'd start out with some background to help us all remember how we got to where we are, and then we can get into the policy itself. So what we have currently in place is a code of ethics policy, which was adopted in 2005. So it's been reviewed a couple of times by administration since then, but there haven't been any amendments. So what's in place is what was in place in 2005. So the Working Group on Responsible Conduct, it's a joint initiative of UBCM, LGMA, and the Ministry of Municipal Affairs. And so they were formed in 2016 to try to get a better understanding on issues related to responsible conduct. And one of the things that came out of that was Bill 26, which received royal assent in 2021. So coming out of that was the requirement for the consideration within 6 months of adopting or considering a code of conduct for local governments. And something else that came out of that as well is they created a model code of conduct, which is something that helped form the draft that we'll be presenting to you today as well. So leading from that, after the general election last year, we had a workshop put on by Reese Harding from Young Anderson this January. And that was attended by the board of directors and representatives from member municipalities as well. And at that workshop, there's a lot of interest shown in taking a regional approach to a code of conduct, having it consistent across the whole region. So stemming from that, the working group was created with corporate officers from the member municipalities and the RDOS as well. So again, the regional working group, what we started with was a very, very big draft, taking examples from high quality code of conducts that were already in existence. Mr. Harding pointed out a couple examples that we started with, but we also took both draft and current policies from member municipalities. And basically we took everything. Anything that was done differently, we gave all the options. Anything that was slightly different variations, we considered everything. So our initial draft of the policy was significantly larger than what we managed to trim it down to. And we did that through several meetings. We got together here in person and basically just went through it. Which way do we like better? Do we need to keep this? Is there something we could do differently? And so when we got that down to a more reasonable size, we brought it to the CAA group and we got feedback from them. And then coming from a couple rounds of that, we sent it back to Mr. Harding and his team at Young Anderson for a review, which led to a bit of delay, which ended up being a good thing, because the reason it was a delay is because they were already conducting this exact same sort of review for other local governments in BC. So what we got back from them benefited from several rounds of going through this. Mr. Harding himself pointed out that just whenever they felt like they had a really good handle on what these should look like, they would think of something different. So we benefited from their experience going through this process over and over again. So the draft that we're looking at today, it's based on these foundational principles of integrity, accountability, leadership, respect, openness, and collaboration. And all of those are defined within the Code of Conduct. Part of that reasoning being that these words can mean a lot of different things to different people. And the goal was to set the standard so that everyone is operating on the same understanding of all these terms. So I wanted to bring it back to the workshop that was put on in January. There were a lot of questions posed to the group. And so I'd like to go through some of those questions and the answers to those questions that this draft is proposing. So one of the main things that was considered was who should be able to file a complaint. And what the draft is proposing is that it would just be elected officials, staff, and volunteers. So there would be no public option to file a complaint through this process. The regional district has a public complaint policy and framework, and they would have that avenue rather than going through this process. Another question was, will an informal resolution procedure be mandatory? And so what the draft suggests is that it's sort of. So it's part of the process, but there is also the option for both the person submitting the complaint and the person who's the complaint is being made about to opt out of it, and then it would go to a formal procedure instead. Another question was whether a complaint could be withdrawn. And so our suggestion is that yes, if it's determined that it would be appropriate, and that would be determined by independent third party rather than anyone involved in the process. And leading from that, the consideration of who should be responsible for receiving and investigating complaints. The draft proposes the creation of 2 new positions of independent persons working in this process. One of those would be the adjudicator, who would be in the position of receiving and performing a preliminary assessment of a complaint. So that would be a point where it could be dismissed as frivolous. It could be perceived as something that could just be resolved informally. But if it would require a formal investigation, then it would be moved forward to the solicitor. And the thinking behind this, so the adjudicator, the thought would be that it would be a regional or participating membership service that everyone would pay into. And then if it moved to a formal investigation by the solicitor, that cost would be paid for by whichever representative was being investigated. So if it was against one of the municipalities, they would be the ones paying for that process rather than the whole region paying together. This was one point where we did have some disagreement with Young Anderson, what they came back with. They were wanting the CAOs to perform the initial intake and that preliminary assessment. But our thought was that beyond there being not a lot of appetite at the CAO level to be involved and have to take on that responsibility, there's also just the perception of a perceived bias in having internally making that decision whether something needs to proceed or not. And there's also the benefit from having one person receiving all complaints for the whole region and any participating municipalities, rather than having 6 or 7 CAOs being at that point of initial intake and preliminary assessment, and having different standards being applied by each one. So this is just an opportunity for a more consistent approach across the board. Another question that was considered was the timeline for the complaint process. And so the draft proposes that a complaint must be submitted within 60 days of the alleged breach of the Code of Conduct, with an allowance for extensions of no more than 30 days should the situation require it. Informal resolutions would be done within 30 days of the complaint. And there is a provision that if it is not done within 30 days, then it would move to an informal or a formal investigation. So the formal investigation would have to be completed within 90 days of referral. So when the solicitor receives the complaint, within 90 days, they would have to finish that. And again, there's a provision that it could be extended by periods of up to 30 days at a time, should the situation warrant it. And then the governing body decision would have to be within 30 days of receiving that report from the solicitor. And again, could be extended, but only by a 2/3 majority vote of the board. Another consideration was whether a complaint moratorium during the election period might be required. And so the draft suggests that complaints submitted between the first day of the nomination period and general voting day would still be accepted, but they would be held in abeyance until the new governing body has taken office. And again, there's a provision where if the complaint is made against an elected official who is not re-elected, then the complaint would be closed. There'd be no need to move forward with it. Another thing that we considered at the workshop was the confidentiality of the investigation and the report. So the recommendation is that it must make all reasonable efforts to maintain the confidentiality of the process while the investigation is taking place. The investigation report may be considered in a closed meeting, but deliberation and voting would take place in an open meeting. And then at the conclusion of the process, the report or a summary of the report would be released to the public within 30 days, along with a summary of the decision by the governing body. Another big point of discussion at the workshop was what remedies would the code allow. It's laid out in detail in section 28.1 of the draft, but just a few examples. would be a letter of reprimand or apology, a specific training or counseling, a prohibition from representing the local government at events or conferences. And then the one that was discussed a lot was the reduced remuneration. And so what the draft policy would put in place is basically an option. It would give each participating member the option to amend the remuneration bylaw to allow for a reduction in remuneration resulting from a breach of the code. If a member did not want to have that option, then they simply would not amend the remuneration bylaw. And so that concludes my presentation, but I just did want to recognize the working group of corporate officers and deputy corporate officers that put so much time and consideration and effort into putting this draft together. It was a really great group to work with, and I think the end result shows that. And so if there's any questions, I'd be happy to take those now.
Okay, thanks for that, Mark. I'm actually not seeing any hands at the moment, but Director Holmes, go ahead.
So the idea is that all the member municipalities would take this back and approve it at their own councils. That's my first question. The follow-up question: what if they don't? What if our council says, well, we like the one we've got already better?
Can you answer that, Mark, or go ahead?
Yeah, to the chair. So basically, it would be up to the member municipalities to take it back if they want to consider it. And if they do choose to stick with what they have or just an alternative, then they would be taken out of the policy before it gets adopted by the regional district.
Okay. Any other? Director Knodel, go ahead.
I'm just looking at something we got a long time back that was referring to this problem. And what I'm kind of concerned about is if all regions and municipalities are not using the same set of rules, will it cause difficulties? There may be some problems in understanding is where I'm going if we're not all uniform in this. So I'm a little concerned about that particular aspect. Thank you.
Okay. Mark, any comments with that, or CAO?
You got it.
Well, I wanted to respond on Director Holmes' question first. So Summerland is one that already has a code of conduct, and they spent some time. It's a principles-based policy rather than an in-depth procedural type of policy that we're promoting. There would be a reluctance, I think, to go through a process in Summerland. Wouldn't mean that we couldn't enter into some sort of agreement where Summerland could use the adjudicator or the complaint process. I don't think that could be outside of that. But if you didn't particularly want to sign on to revoke your policy and to sign on to a whole new one, I think that could be worked out.
Okay. Director Bush.
So the policy would still remain for all the directors here, right? Whether they were in a municipality or not?
Yeah, for our board, if we adopt the policy, it would apply to all members.
All members sitting around the table.
Yeah, for a regional district issue.
Yeah.
Not something that occurred back in a municipality.
Okay, that's Director Coyne.
Yeah, it would just mean like people like Director Holmes would have to abide by two different policies if that's the way they want to work. And I understand the reasoning behind that. I think, you know, if you think back to when we discussed this, it was so that we would have, you know, kind of the same rules for everybody as a baseline. It didn't mean we all had to adopt exactly the same thing, but it gave us a base guide to, this is what we're all going to agree to since we're all in the same regional district. But, I mean, I don't know what Penticton's thinking is, but I think we're going to probably introduce this to our council. We all are supposed to explore this, so it'll be going back to mine if we adopt it here, and we've just been putting it off until this process was finished. So, yeah.
See where it goes. Director Bloomfield.
And thank you, yes, and through the chair and further to Director Coyne's comments, I think the intent in the City of Penticton is to take it to council and get direction from council, but I know that the staff and the various CEOs have put a lot of effort into this in response to a request from this board of directors back in the workshop that we had, and I think that that if we have an agreement amongst this regional district, then it could be the basis of the province maybe bringing in some sort of provincial guideline for a code of conduct for all municipalities and regional districts within the province. But that's lofty thinking, but this is a good start. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Anybody else? Director Taylor?
Again, really appreciate the work that's gone into this, and I think this is a really important document. Just the 60 days in which to get this initiated seems like a long time. I'm just wondering if it's long enough, really, and if there's been any discussion of that with the lawyer or the group that's advising you.
Okay, so that was to initiate a complaint. It was 60 days, and I think the wording was it could be extended by 30 if needed, but I don't know how you go about getting that extension. But anyway, further?
And is that extension only if you've already initiated the complaint, or do you really have 90 days in which to file your complaint?
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm just having a little bit of personal experience in this. Sometimes it's kind of a bit like a snowball. It takes a while before you start realizing that you've got an issue to deal with.
Okay. I've seen another hand. Director Bloomfield?
Yeah, thank you again through the chair in response to that question. I think that this document has been hashed out by a group of CAOs, and I think that the staff for various municipalities and the regional district that have thrashed this out have got enough experience that they should have confidence in the dates that they've put in or the timeframes that they've put into this document. So nothing's perfect, of course, and we may need to address this at a later date, but I defer to the expertise of the officials that have worked hard, and I know they have worked hard on this because I've had many conversations with our corporate staff and the municipality at the city, and I know that the amount of work has gone into it has been immense.
Okay. Any further discussion on this or questions for Mr. Coyne? Seeing no hands, thank you, Mark, for the presentation, and we'll go to the board here for direction. Are we looking to move this forward, Director Coyne?
I'll make the motion to move it forward.
Okay, so you're moving the recommended motion and seconding it, I am assuming. Thank you. Any further discussion on this? I do have one question. I guess we adopt it, but how is it amended? Do we then do an amendment if one of the municipalities want out? Would that come later? Just to be clear on the process. So, CAO?
So this is a committee recommendation, and that's why it's formulated that way, Mr. Chair. So that would then go from committee to the board for adoption. We don't adopt it at committee.
Yeah.
But I think during that process, And I'm not sure if we're planning on going out and presenting. We certainly would if municipality requested it, but I think each of the corporate officers and CAOs were very involved in the development of it. So I think it would be up to them to take it forward to their own councils, have the discussion, let us know, and then we could bring that back for final discussion.
Okay, so to be clear then, we adopt it in committee. It won't come back to the board until it's gone to the municipalities first? Is that the intent?
Yeah, you know, it wouldn't really bother our policy if one of the members opted out. So
either or?
We could, yeah. We can wait and, well, I'm sure administratively we'll be talking to the 6-member municipalities now to encourage them to get it up to their own councils. And then we can bring something back with regards to process.
Okay. Director Coyne?
I don't think we have to wait for the member municipalities. This is code for this board. Whether the member municipalities want to join into that or not is up to them. But I think in the meantime, we've got the policy. It's a good policy. There's been a lot of work put into it by not just regional district staff, but municipal staff, and I'd feel comfortable with it coming back to the next board meeting.
I have to say it wouldn't bother me either way, but I just wanted to know the process and what to expect. So, did I miss a hand? Oh, Director Conant, go ahead.
I just a quick question that came up about being able to file a complaint if you're a volunteer. And we have a lot of events where people just drop in and volunteer. And then there are the official volunteers, I'm sure, where if you go into a committee, you have to fill out a form. And I'm thinking it would be really good if it was specifically for official volunteers or something, because a lot of times people do just show up at an event and start handing out hot dogs. And I mean, there's a lot of people that just do that. And maybe it should be official volunteers or written in some fashion.
There is a definition for volunteers, but Mr. Coyne, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to read it, but
go ahead. Yeah, probably a good idea to read it out so we're clear on it.
Sure. So the definition is a person engaged by the local government who, without compensation, offers their time, skills, or services to the local government. So I think the key part of that would be engaged by, so not someone who's just showing up.
Okay, so you ask the volunteers to step forward, okay? Director Taylor?
Sorry. And again, I appreciate that you guys know what you're doing and really put a bunch of time in here. Conflict of interest, I don't see that defined anywhere. And there's a section on it, but there's no definition of it. And it just seems to be at the root of a lot of our discussions in this area. We all think we know what conflict of interest is. And at the end of the day, it seems to be only financial. Is that what we're going to use or what?
CAO thoughts, or Ms. Mullen?
Well, we've had several presentations on this from lawyers as to conflict of interest, and typically we would rely on the Act for elected officials with regards to what a conflict is. So I don't think we really want to vary too much from the legal definition in the Act, and that is basically pecuniary.
So is there any value in just short-circuiting things and having the definition included in the list of definitions?
I guess it's possible to do that. The conflict of interest as defined in the Local Government Act or something along those lines. But
yeah, it is. I mean, in the Act, it is strictly up to each member to determine whether they're in conflict or not.
Yeah.
So that's a tough one to get your head around.
Yeah. Go ahead, Director Coyne, and then Director Bloomfield.
I just want to caution putting a definition from an act in a bylaw. or in a policy, because if the definition changes, it no longer is relevant. If you want to have it as referred to the act, or then I would say that, because then your bylaw or policy stays relevant with the change in legislation. When you actually use that piece of, we've been dealing with this, we're throwing out all kinds of old stuff because it doesn't apply anymore. You know, acts and definitions are repealed, and then you're stuck with something that's no longer, you know, up to code. So that would be my question there.
Okay. Ms. Molden, response, and then.
Yeah, just to confirm that, that is exactly what we would do. Anytime we make reference to legislation, we're simply going to refer to that legislation. We're not going to try to interpret it. So the definition for conflict of interest would be in accordance with the Local Government Act. That's all we'd put in there.
Director Bloomfield?
Thank you. And yeah, through the chair, Director Coyne actually beat me to the punch on that one. And yeah, if we specify what a conflict of interest is, and those rules change within other municipal or other provincial or even federal legislation, then we could be out of step. And also because it is self-governing, if we determine what a conflict of interest is, then it could absolve a member from that self-governing model that is critical to the actual terms of conflict of interest.
Okay. Go ahead, Director Watt.
Thank you, through the chair. Just for my own curiosity, and I guess because we self-govern, and I know this group does as well, so perceived conflict is something we often recuse ourselves from. But I think because we're talking about a code of conduct and not an act or a law, is that not something we could create? And I'm not trying to stretch out the product or add anything to it. And I'm just suggesting that pecuniary doesn't cover the things we collectively have talked about as a conflict. And I think that maybe the definition we have as a board could be a little bit more exaggerated.
Thought? Go ahead, CAO.
So there's one benefit of having professionals. So if you have an adjudicator and a legal firm, really mostly conflict of interest is going to be about common law. And there's lots of cases and there's lots of referrals that lawyers will look at to determine if it's frivolous or if there is a case, and they'll make that decision. So I don't know if I'd encourage the board to drill down too much on this. There is the sections in the act that describes the process, and I think within that, those professionals will make a determination as to whether there's a case or not.
Okay. Any other hands? So we've got the motion on the floor. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? Motion carries. That brings us down to the next item, which is our UBCM meetings. And basically, too many topics for one minister. I'll go to the CAO on this one. I think we're down to it only being a problem for one. So let's deal with that. Go ahead.
Yeah, we have too many topics, Mr. Chair. So what UBCM has determined is, or maybe it's the provincial government, is that you only get one meeting with a minister and you can only have 3 topics during that 15 minutes that you'll get with each minister if you get a meeting at UBCM. So we have 2 ministers that we had exceeded that on. The first was the Minister of Agriculture and Food, and we're allowed 3 issues, and we had indicated 4. So we had equity in farm treatment and ALC regulations. We had application of PST on non-traditional food producing corporations. We had Campbell Mountain Compost, which is an ALR issue, and we had ALR amalgamation of square footage coverage on a single parcel. So we have 3 issues that we indicated that involve the ALR, and we have that separate one on PST, on non-traditional food producing corporations. So we'd have to decide which one you wanted to take off, or we could generalize and just say ALR and then the PST one. And you try and jam as much as you can in on ALR during the time that you get.
Yeah, that's always a problem when you, even 3, you're down to 5 minutes on each one. That's always tough. Yeah, you're down to, by the time you get the introductions of everybody, you're down to 10 and more often than not. So it's really tight.
And the minister likes to speak too.
Yeah, exactly. If you don't give them a chance, you're even making it tougher. Director Roberts, I see a hand from you. Go ahead.
Thank you. The motion around square footage is a policy by Ministry of Agriculture. I ran into that at the last UBCM. ALC redirected it to Ag. Didn't really have a lot of time to talk too much about it with the minister, and of course now we've changed minister and team. So I see that as a Ministry of Agriculture versus ALR. Thanks.
Yeah, well, I think that was separate from the ALR, but that would be a possibility to take that one to staff. And that's a separate meeting with staff. You actually get longer to discuss it then too. Director Roberts?
Yeah, I would like to, I'd like to switch that to that. I think that's a good decision.
Okay, that would bring us down to the 3 if we send that one meeting to staff. Was that the one that you had brought to the board, just for my own information? Okay, so you're comfortable with it going to staff? Director Gettins, a thought or
Yeah,
question?
just the Campbell Mountain one, I think, is one where we need the most political. If we're going to make any changes there, you know, we need the minister to get on side on that one. So I don't know if that should be shared with 2 other. I know everything is important, but I do know that you do only have this few minutes of discussion. And I think that Campbell Mountain one is so regionally important that I don't know if we even want to share it with too many other ones. So just putting it out there that I think Campbell Mountain needs to really be top of the list, and then figure out the other 2, even in the other staff meeting or something. I just think if you got 10 minutes to try and explain Campbell Mountain, that's not even long enough, and that's a big one for our region. So I'd like to see that get priority.
That's a good point. Absolutely a good point. Director Coyne?
So I'm going to make a suggestion once you figure out what the main topic you want to do is. Don't throw everything else off, the table. Put them in briefing notes and give them to the minister when you go. That way you can mention them at the end of your meeting, or you can mention them in the beginning and then say, but this is what we're here to talk about today. Could we please have a follow-up afterwards with you or your staff on these items? They'll look at it. So don't just throw stuff off. Keep it in the list, but have a very strong talking points on the things that you want addressed right away.
Yeah, the main topic, which could be the Campbell Mountain landfill. Are people comfortable with that? Okay, by consensus, we're agreeing to that. So there will be the briefing notes included. All right. Go ahead.
That does put the onus on the directors who have those other issues to make sure staff has the proper information if you're expecting staff to write your briefing note for you, or you write it and then submit it to staff.
Okay. Director Gettins?
So who's doing the briefing note for Campbell Mountain?
That will be staff. That one's mostly their experience with it. Okay, and there was the second issue, or were we okay with the next one?
No, the next one is the Ministry of Transportation Infrastructure. We had 5 issues that we initially presented. So the first one was traffic issues in Okanagan Falls along Highway 97. And then we had an issue about funding for sewer and water. And I understand that one has been now transferred to the Minister of municipal affairs. So that one's already off. So we'll remove that one. This third one that we had, this was this Section 52 agreement between the minister and the regional district to streamline bylaw amendments. This is where on anything involving a road within 800 meters, we stop at third reading, we send it into the ministry, they have to approve it, and then it can come back for adoption. And that can take a while on some applications. So there is a provision for a local government to enter into a regional district. This doesn't apply to the municipal members. For a regional district to enter into an agreement. And in that way, you can get approval to remove that referral to MOTI after third reading. So we had, Mr. Garish had brought this to the board previously, and we'd agreed to send it in to see if we could discuss it with the minister. The other two, one talked about the revitalization and expansion of provincial campsites and roadside amenities. And then the other one was illegal use of road rights of way in high density areas. So really, we're looking at removing one more, Mr. Chair.
Thoughts, Director Holmes?
I'm just a little confused about the Section 52 agreement. What would the ask be for the ministry?
To enter into an agreement with us. Apparently, they're a little, like administratively, they're not real keen on these. So that would be taking it to the minister.
Director Coyne?
I think that should be our primary discussion then. If we can speed up our approval times, I think we should be pushing that. A lot of the other stuff we can lump into one discussion, traffic and Okanagan Falls or the right of ways. I mean, they're all kind of connected, right? I mean, you have a busy street that isn't our right of way. So maybe we can lump that into the same thing, focus on the first part. And then if we have time, we can bring up the right of way in traffic situations, because I mean, they're all going to be the same. And then, but have really strong briefing notes to go forward on that.
Okay, I've seen a hand from Director Roberts. Go ahead.
Thank you. It was my motion in regards to the revitalization around roadside, whether or not it's the signage, et cetera. And I think we had talked about moving that to dealing with the Ministry of, is it the Ministry of Happy Places? I don't know, it's got such a long name, cultural, history, and everything else that you can think of that's wonderful about BC.
Yeah, I think that's where we might have sent it at first, but UBCM chooses in the end where they think which ministry it's going to, and that's how it got to Ministry of Transportation at the moment. So
could I switch that to a staff meeting then?
Could we just pull it?
We could pull it and put it in a staff. Sure, that would probably make more sense. If you're comfortable doing that, you'll get the chance to speak better to it for sure. Director Federico?
Could that possibly fall under TODA and chatting with them to see what they can do to help move that along or help somehow? Yeah.
Guess it's all possible. Go to Director Coyne first.
I can't talk about the whole thing, but there's something in the works with Destination BC in the province to do some of this stuff right now. And it's in preliminary stages through the tourism operators and all that. So I think we should pull it for now, because there's going to be funding and there's going to be some announcements coming up, and they're just not my place to announce the announcements. So
Yeah.
I think that would be the best way, because that was a specific topic in the last working group that I was in.
Okay, Director Roberts, and then.
Yeah, thank you. It's just trying to figure out the best place, because it did split between two different things, whether or not it's discussing around, tourist options and that, but we've looked at a decrease in infrastructure along the highways for whether or not it's rubbish receptacles, especially the bare ones, washroom facilities. We look at coming from Hope all the way down to Nighthawk, how we had things prior, but slowly but surely the contractors we've had have been removing them. And again, that's a highways issue. And I kind of wanted, if that's been talked about in the group that Director Coyne is talking about, I appreciate that part, but I'm wondering whether or not that's still something I should talk to staff in Ministry of Transport around their contracting process with, for instance, in our area, AIM, and prior to that, Argo, and the removal of a lot of the infrastructure for supporting tourism and travel along the corridor.
Yeah, it'd probably be better at staff is my thought, but Director Taylor?
I just want to thank the board for at least perhaps keeping us briefly in the meeting on our one item about traffic management on Highway 97. As an unincorporated community, this is one of our very few opportunities to get in front of the minister, and we've got significant growth happening, and certainly that'll take time, but we've tried for many years to address this problem, and so if we can continue to give it our all in terms of pulling all the levers at our disposal, that would be much appreciated. We'll keep it brief.
Okay, so we did one more down to staff. We're okay with that. Not seeing anyone jumping up and down saying absolutely not, so that's what we're going to go with. All right, I think that takes care of the open session. We do have a closed session, and we're potentially closing the meeting in accordance with section, I got to put my glasses on here, section 91C of the community charter, that the board close the meeting to the public on the basis of labor relations and other employee relations. So looking for a motion to go in camera. Moved, thank you, seconded. All in favor? Great, any opposed? Motion carries. So do we have, I think the last time we had Mr. Safino, and there they come.